Hello, hello, welcome in. Welcome in, we're going to go through some psychology stuff today. Hello, hello, welcome in everybody, welcome in. We're going over some psychology stuff today. We're going to go through a practice for chapter 1 for a midterm coming up. I'll also go through some of the topics in there today. I also have this available on my website as well. We'll get started here in just a moment or so. How's everyone doing? Good morning. It's a nice and lovely Thursday morning. How's everyone doing? Hola, Ollie. Hola, Pamela. How are you doing? Hopefully you need some psychology today. So we're doing a psychology live stream. Thank you for sharing the live. Thanks for liking the live. I really appreciate you guys. I'll go ahead and get started here in just a moment. But I do have some practice questions here we'll go through. I have practice questions and I have some labeling and all that sort of stuff. So we'll get through all of it today. Hey, how you doing? How you doing, Kelly? Good, on my way to work early this morning, so I will be on for a bit this morning. Awesome, well, have a safe trip to work. Can I do chapter 6 practice quiz? Not today, potentially later. It's been requested that we do this today, so we're going to do this. Hola, Doc. Hola, Doc. How are you doing? Good morning. We'll start here in just a moment. I do appreciate you guys joining. Kelly, you were the one who requested this. Essentially, what I worked up here, I have answers to all the study guides here, and then I have a practice quiz. And we can kind of, whatever we're kind of looking for here, whether we kind of want to go through and I have all the terms labeled throughout here. We can go through and I'm about to leave for my classes for the day. Oh, sorry. That sucks. You're about, I feel to class, but have a good day at class, Brianna. But we can go through and we can define these together. I do have a practice quiz. Where can we follow along? I do have this available on my website for download, but you can follow along here, or it'll be on YouTube afterwards if you want to follow along. But if you want the actual document itself, it's on my website. Pretty much as I went through and I labeled everything, and then I made a practice question, or I made a practice quiz, another answer key, and then for part 2 I have an answer key here. I made a little table for all the theoretical perspectives, and then I also have another little practice quiz here with all the answers. So we can either start with a practice quiz, or we can go through and we can label we can define all these terms together and give an example. Whichever works best for you guys. Did we have a preference on it? But if you're just joining, thanks for joining. Thanks for liking the live, and thanks for following and sharing and everything like that. But we can go ahead and get started here in a minute. We can define it and then go over the practice test. Awesome, okay. I know you were the one who really requested this, so I figured we can kind of go off what you're more so looking for already. So we can start now. Let's see what size pen works best. That probably works best. So in chapter 1, we're essentially going over just like the introduction to psychology and what that kind of looks like. So obviously this psychology, which you should know, is the study of behavior and mental processes. So essentially an example of that would be if some people have phobias, and then we can look into how we can do therapies to help them overcome their fears. Things like that. Psychology is also not necessarily always therapy, but it can be used in marketing, sports, things like that as well. Good morning, OG Prince fan. How are you doing? And J.B. Watson is considered the founder of behaviorism, which is observing behavior over introspection. So behavior over introspection. And then what is introspection, essentially? So we kind of know what behavior is, but introspection is essentially a self-examination. I'm just going to put self-exam, where an individual is going to report like their thoughts and feelings. An example of that might be, those like little weird paintings where it's like, do you see a butterfly or an elephant It's kind of like that, where a person describes their emotions while they're looking at something like that. That's how you can use introspection to evaluate behavior. I have my psych drug and behavior test today. Can we please go over axon potential? So no, not right now, because we're doing psychology questions. But I do have action potentials on my page. You can go watch those videos. I have those there. Stressed with nursing school. How are you? I'm doing very well. I'm chilling. Thank you for following. Thanks for joining, everybody. But if we have time at the end, I can go over the axon potential. But for now, I have a video on my profile that you can watch over that instead. All right, moving on to the scientific method. The scientific method is like the process to conduct research. So that's like forming a hypothesis, conducting experiments, analyzing results. So we can take a look at certain... big thing was like if chewing gum can improve memory. So you can conduct a study. So you'd have your hypothesis would be like chewing gum promotes memory retention for exams. Your conduction experiment would be you have one group of people chewing gum taking a test, and then one people not chewing gum taking a test, and then you analyze the results by seeing what their test scores are. A hypothesis, we kind of went over what that was. It's kind of a prediction of a relationship. Like kind of what I mentioned there with the chewing gum. So the relationship would be chewing gum versus test scores. Moving on to our guy B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner is a behaviorist, and he's mainly responsible for operant conditioning plus reinforcement. So Skinner essentially trained pigeons to peck at a button for food, showing that behavior can be shaped by rewards. So think of a behavior is going to influence a certain reward. So if a bird wants food and they press a button for food, they know that pressing the button is sort of a reward for food. So critical thinking is essentially just analyzing and evaluating information logically. So this is more so our logical thinking, which is a very important skill to have. So, like, for example, especially Facebook, man. On Facebook, if you just can't believe everything you see on Facebook, a critical thinker would see something on Facebook and go, that sounds really out there, maybe I should do my research on that. And then you start checking, like, reliable sources, like PubMed, before you're like, oh yeah, I believe that, Facebook is really your indicator of who thinks critically and who does not think critically. That's for sure. Would Watson be considered known for classical conditioning? Not necessarily. Classical conditioning is more so Pavlov, but Watson does use it. Especially in the little Albert experiment. But Watson is more so the father of behaviorism. So looking more so at behaviors rather than like self-examination or whatever. But he did use classical research, but he's not like the psychologist associated with it. If that makes sense. Does that make sense, Kelly? So he used it, but that's not necessarily like what he's known for. More so like behaviorism. I move on once I see we're good here. Yes, okay, that makes sense. Perfect. Awesome. So double-blind studies. Think of double, so you're thinking two. So what two parties would be a part of a study? That would be your researchers plus your participants. So neither one of them know who is receiving the treatment. Essentially what this does is this eliminates researcher bias. So in a drug trial, like doctors know the patients knowing who's getting the real pill or the placebo. For example, like if a pharmaceutical company is trying to sell a particular medication, and they know that this certain group is taking the medication, if they spent thousands and millions of dollars on a treatment, they would be, they'd be more inclined to exaggerate the results a little bit if they knew who was receiving the treatment. So this eliminates bias. Treatment groups are essentially just the group that's getting the independent variable, and independent versus dependent variables. I know we go on to that a little bit later on, but I guess we can answer that question now. I'm gonna label these like I have a part 1 and a part 2. So if I put like 2.4, I'm referring to part 2, question 4. So 2.4 are independent versus our dependent. So your independent variable is normally what is on the x-axis. So, and then your dependent which would be what's on your y. So essentially, the dependent depends on the independent. So if you think about like mother and child, the mother is independent. She has a job. She makes money. She cooks. Blah blah blah. But her child doesn't make money. Doesn't cook. Doesn't have a job to make money. So the child depends on the mother. If that makes sense. For example, if y is work and x is time, typically work depends on the amount of time that you've spent on something, so the amount of work you get done is dependent on the amount of time you're spending. Hopefully that made sense. Thanks for joining. Thanks for liking the live. I appreciate you guys. The more that you guys like the live, the more that this will get pushed out to people. So that would definitely be fantastic. But moving on to random sampling. I guess did I finish my thing of treatment? So the independent variable or the treatment, but basically. But random sampling is basically where, so if you're like, I don't know, think about when you're at like Costco or Sam's Club and there are samples and you're trying samples. So that's what sampling is. So taking something from a group of something. So like taking a group of students from a university, and they're chosen randomly. This is for fair representation. And then you also have what's known as a control group. The control group is essentially what does not receive treatment. Does not get. So like if you're trying to test, like anxiety or blood pressure or something, there would be a group that receives a placebo, which has no effect at all. That remains your control group. Welcome in. If you're just joining, we're going over some psychology questions for chapter 1 for a midterm. So our stratified and our representative studies, essentially, this is where we represent like a key subgroup of a population. So if you're in high school, right, and you have like your freshman, sophomore, junior, seniors, you would have an equal number of each of these, essentially. So do you want equal numbers of freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors? Because obviously that like variable of stress would vary across freshmen versus seniors. You have seniors very stressed out about college applications. Freshmen normally are not really stressed out on like college applications yet. Freshmen might be more so stressed out about, they're very new to high school and stuff, so you have to take a look at the different groups. This is for college, I believe. This should be for general psychology, chapter 1. Passed this already. Awesome. Congratulations for passing. So today's lesson is chapter 1 of psychology. But if you're just joining in, welcome. Thanks for joining. Thanks for liking the live, and thanks for sharing, and thanks for following. Blind studies are essentially where participants, they do not know if they are in an experimental or a control group. So they wouldn't know if they're getting the placebo, if they're getting the treatment, or things like that. So they're different from double-blind studies. So a blind study is just the participants, so just participants. And then operational definition is essentially an explanation of how a variable is measured in a study. So take, for example, like happiness in a study would be the number of times a person smiles in a day. So operational definition is how variable is studied or measured. Psychopathology is essentially the study of like mental disorders and symptoms, like the causes, treatments. Pathology normally means some sort of like condition or disorder or dysfunction. Psycho for psychology, or mental, so mental disorder. Collectivism is a cultural value which prioritizes groups over individuals. So this is where you're trying to essentially focus on the... how do I word this? It's like where you're focused on promoting the well-being of the group over an individual. So it's like, if I make this decision benefits me, but it hurts everybody else. So I wouldn't make that decision if I didn't, care about hurting other people. So group over, we'll go 1. And individualism is the opposite, so it's the 1 over the group, essentially. So obviously the US is very individualistic. A lot of people are very concerned with their own things and stuff like that. But there are countries where groups are a little more prioritized over individualism. Thanks for following and thanks for joining, everybody. I really appreciate you. So that essentially covers all of the terms, chapter 1 here. So now we are going to move on Well, yes. So I have a part 2, but we're going to do the practice questions first here. And then we'll move on to part 2, because it's a little more explanation is required for those. All right, is everyone ready to begin the little practice quiz after going over that information? Yes, okay. All right, so number 1. What is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes? I can give you guys a couple seconds to answer that, or I can go through and fly through these. I know Kelly here is ready to answer. Is everyone else ready to answer? Be awesome. But yes, obviously, we're looking at psychology. Number 2, who is the founder of behaviorism? Went over a couple people here, and we wanted to take a look at who was the founder of, or the father of, behaviorism. The answer is J.B. Watson. J.B. Watson was here where he was the founder of behaviorism, so he wanted to look at behavior over introspection. Number 3, what is the process of self-examination where individuals report their thoughts and feelings? I'll give you guys a couple seconds to answer that. Yes, the answer is A. Again, this is where we were talking about. This is where you look at a certain picture, like we mentioned the butterfly versus the elephant, and then the patient would report what they're feeling and their emotions. So number 4 asks, what research process involves forming a hypothesis, conducting experiments, and analyzing results? Thank you for sharing the live. If you're just joining, we're doing some practice for psychology, chapter 1. I'll give you guys a couple seconds. What research process involves forming a hypothesis, conducting experiments, and analyzing results? But the answer is B. This is scientific method, not theory, random sampling. Number 5 asks, a testable prediction about the relationship between variables is called a or an. Give you guys a couple seconds. Again, we're taking a look at number 5 here. We're taking a look at a testable prediction about the relationship between variables is called it is a hypothesis. All right, number 6, which psychologist studied operant conditioning and reinforcement? Operant conditioning and reinforcement. Alrighty, awesome. B.F. Skinner. Number 7, in the process of analyzing and evaluating information logically rather than accepting it at face value is called Hello, hello, welcome into the live, everybody. Thanks for joining, and thanks for liking the live, and thanks for sharing the live. It's good to see everybody here. The answer is B. It is critical thinking. Think of the Facebook example. Facebook is a great indicator of who critically thinks or not, for sure. Again, critical thinking would be like you see an outrageous claim on the internet, and instead of just accepting it, like you're like, like Taylor Swift crashed a private jet into the freeway or something, and you're like, a person who doesn't critically think would be like, oh my god, Taylor Swift crashed a plane, and then just left and went and told everybody. But a critical thinker would be like, that sounds a little outrageous. Let me look into that. And then you check Taylor Swift's like Instagram, or you go to a reliable source, and it's like, oh, she's like not even anywhere near a plane right now. She's performing live. So how could she be on a plane? That's essentially like kind of what that is. Moving on to number 8, in which type of study do both researchers and participants not know who receives the actual treatment? So both and not know. So they both do not know. Hello everybody, welcome in. We're doing some psychology practice questions. If you're just joining, thanks for joining. Thanks for liking the live. Thanks for following. A little bit. Again, number 8 asks, in which type of study do both researchers and participants not know who receives the actual treatment? The answer is B. It is a double-blind study. Remember, double meaning both researchers and participants. Moving on to number 9, what is the group in an experiment that receives the independent variable or treatment? What is the group in an experiment that receives the independent variable or the treatment? So the answer is the treatment group. The control group is what receives the placebo. Otherwise, no treatment. So like example, if we were using gum for test scores, our treatment group would get gum and our control group would not get gum. All right, moving on to number 10, what method ensures that participants are chosen randomly to represent a population? Awesome. You guys, a couple more seconds to answer. If you're just joining, welcome in. We're doing some psychology practice questions. Thank you all for your participation. I really appreciate it. It's always great to see you guys in here. But number 10 is random sampling. Moving on to number 11 here. It's going to ask which group is in the experiment does not receive the treatment and serves as a comparison. Kind of went over this just like about 2 questions ago. And then at the end of these questions, we can answer any questions that we have about it. Over anything that we just covered. But again, what is the group? An experiment that does not receive the treatment and they serve as a comparison for the group that is receiving the treatment. I got an A+ in this exam last semester. Loved research methodology. Yes, research methodology is fun. This is for psychology, but research methodology is super duper important for psychology. My girlfriend's actually in her master's right now in counseling, so she loves this stuff. It's always fun listening to her talk about what she's going over. Now the answer is C. It is going to be our control group. Remember back to our gum thing. This is our control group that does not get the gum, and they serve as a comparison to see if gum would improve test scores. Number 12 asks, a study that ensures different subgroups of a population that are proportionally represented is a... What would that be? A study that ensures different subgroups of a population are proportionally represented is called a... Thank you for following. It's always good to see some new faces. Remember, the key thing here is subgroups and proportionally represented. So they're represented equally. All the different groups in a population. I take my T's test tomorrow. I'm so scared. Oh my goodness, good luck on your T's. You definitely got this. The answer is stratified and representative study. Strata is a subgroup, yes. But essentially here, I kind of like went over, like in high school, you have your freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors. And if you're going to measure stress among high school students, you'd want to take a look at each different subgroup here and make sure they're represented equally, because they all have different forms of stress and things like that. Alrighty. So number 13 asks, in which type of study do the participants not know whether they are receiving the treatment or the placebo? Unfortunately, I'm doing a tease review tomorrow's show, so sorry I wasn't done a little earlier. I've been preparing for it. So then Saturday we're not going to go live, and then Sunday we're going to continue on with our psychology stuff. The answer here is just it's A. It's blind study. So again, we had our double-blind study where both the researcher and participants. So if we have our double and our blind, just our blind. So in double, they don't know. They both don't know. In blind, the researcher knows, but the participants don't know. Yes, the information will be held from both parties. You teach better than my teacher. I'm following you. I need major help. Awesome. Yeah, thank you for following. You send, if you need anything explained in a video, or we can do stuff in a live. I mainly do anatomy and physiology, but send me an email if you want to see anything in a live. I appreciate you guys following me. I definitely try to get everybody's. I get a lot of requests for information and lives and videos, so I try to get to everybody. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to send me some requests and being patient while I get those out to you. Number 14 asks, how do researchers specifically define and measure variables in a study? So here is mostly like how do they measure? What is the term for that? Give you guys a couple seconds to answer. So the answer is B. It's operational definition. We kind of went over at the start here. Our operational definition is going to be how a variable is measured. Define, yes. Define as operational, yes. Alrighty. All right, the study of mental disorders, their symptoms, causes, and treatments is called... If you're just joining in, welcome. Welcome. We're going over some psychology questions. The answer is A, psychopathology. Remember, psycho meaning like a mental process, and then patho is a disorder or dysfunction. So then you combine the two. That's how you get that. Number 16, a cultural value that prioritizes the group over the individual is known as... Give you guys a couple seconds to answer. Thanks for liking the live. Thanks for sharing the live. I really appreciate you guys. So the answer here is going to be A. So conversely here, number 17 is going to ask a cultural value that emphasizes personal goals and independence is known as... I'll give you guys a couple seconds to answer that one. If you're just joining us, welcome here. We're going over some psychology. Should do a Kahoot with live one day. Yeah, you know what? Actually, that's a really good idea. I didn't even think about that. I want to see how maybe I can set that up. I'm going to write that down 1 second while you guys answer that. Thank you. Does anyone know how it would even go about... So the answer here is B. I'll give you guys the answer. It's individualism. Does anyone know how it'd go about setting up a Kahoot? I've never said... Obviously, I've played Kahoot, but I've never... That's actually like a genius idea. Because I like doing these like practice questions and whatnot, but never heard of it. I might prepare that or something for next week. I think they have a button somewhere where you can create your own. You just make an account, make the slides. Yeah, I guess I'd be curious about how I would put it up on the screen. I guess I can record like my computer screen or something while it's up. It's not hard at all. Okay. I'll look into that after today. That's a really good idea. I appreciate that idea, Melina. Yeah, I know that. I know they would answer from their own devices. Yeah, so we can get the code. Yeah. Yeah, there should be a QR code you can post and everyone uses. Yeah. I know that. I guess it would be... people would need to switch back and forth between the live and the Kahoot. I'll look into setting that up. That's a good idea. Okay, yeah. I see. So I'm just reading about Kahoot real quick, and then I'll continue on here. Awesome. That is incredible. That's a great idea. I'm going to do that. Yeah, potentially needing to... You think the questions show up on the player's screen, but then the people wouldn't necessarily be watching the live. I know unless like you can like put the like live on your computer or something. I'll try it out maybe. We'll give it a test run. Maybe I'll do that on like Monday or Tuesday next week, and we'll see. Awesome. But anyway, right? They wouldn't be interacting. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I can try it out and maybe see how to make that a thing. Do Apple phones have split screen? I noticed most. I don't think so. You can kind of like tab in between and stuff. Like you can like swipe up and it'll like show you screens, but I don't know. I also guess so. Like people wouldn't necessarily have to play; they could just answer in the comments or whatever. But I'll try it out and see how that goes. But I do have a part 2. Is anyone in my psychology in the live, Kelly? This is MCAT stuff. This stuff is on MCAT. The MCAT. But before so I have a part 2 to this. But were there any questions from, were there just any questions about the psychology material that we just went over? After we finish this chapter, we can move on to anatomy and physiology, but I just want to make sure there are no questions here before I move on. Does anyone have any questions? Kelly, did you have any questions about stuff we just went over? Was that good review for your chapter? Yeah, you kind of gave me keywords, so I know what to look for. Perfect. Let's get this anatomy. Yeah, I did promise some psychology, so we have a little bit more psychology to do, and then we'll get to some anatomy. Yes, you make it so simple. Perfect. Awesome. I'm very glad. So we'll go through these questions, and then I have a couple more questions, and then we'll take a little break, and then I'll move over to anatomy. And then I still have the practice questions from the endocrine system yesterday, so we'll go back to those, or we can just answer any questions that you guys have. But I'm going to move on for Kelly. Kelly's been waiting for this, so we're absolutely going to stick with psychology until we're done. Alrighty. But moving on, here we have, and I'll answer probably these questions down here. But we have our difference between a sample and a population. Essentially, what that is a sample would be a smaller group so a smaller group would be, 200 students chosen from a university, whereas a population would be a lot of a larger group, so an entire population. So an entire population would be across all universities. So large group. So let's just put one school. Population be all schools. Again, we needed to differentiate between a case study, a survey, and a naturalistic observation. So a case study would essentially be, it's just an in-depth study of an individual or a small group. So this is where you would be covering one patient with a brain injury. A survey would be collecting like a self-reported data from a questionnaire or an interview. So like you could ask like 1,000 students about their study habits, their eating habits, their sleeping habits. So think of like questions or interviews. And then a naturalistic observation is just whenever you are, I'm just going to put observation. This is essentially where you're just observing and you are not interfering with it. So no interaction. So like if you, I'm not recommending you do this because you might get in a lot of trouble, but you would watch, like, if you go out and you just kind of watch people and observe what they do. It's a little creepy, but I definitely don't recommend doing that just to do it. But I did participate in one study where it was biomechanics class, and we went over the different types of gaits. We did gait analysis, which essentially like is how someone walks. And we actually went, and it was really creepy. It just was it was like a group of like 40 people just sitting on benches around campus and marking down the different types of gaits they saw when people were walking around. It was, yeah, very creepy. I felt very weird doing it. Alrighty. Class for school, yes. Thanks, all. You're a big help. I'll be back. Awesome. I'm glad that I'm of help, and I'm glad that you'll be back. Moving on. So our next one was determining if a correlation is positive, negative, or if there's no correlation. Essentially, so I'll put positive, negative, and no correlation. So a positive correlation is both variables increase or decrease together. So both increase or both decrease. A negative correlation would essentially be the one variable increases while the other one decreases, or vice versa. So one increases, the other decreases, or one decreases and it increases. So like a positive correlation would be like, obviously it's not always like this, essentially, but ideally in a realistic world, more studying would equal a higher test score for positive. So more studying, higher test score. Negative correlation would be the more social media you use, the lower your grades are. Things like that. And then no correlation would be there's no predictable relationship. So just the variables have just no impact on each other. And then our next one here was, we kind of went over this already, identifying an independent versus a dependent variable. Ethics in psychological research for humans and animals, essentially what that means is that there is something called informed consent, meaning that participants have to volunteer and they have to agree to it. You have to maintain confidentiality, meaning that the data that you are obtaining from these individuals are private. You can't just say like, oh, like Joe Schmo, is an idiot, and we had him do a survey and it turns out he is like a negative like 80 IQ. You can't do that. You'll get sued very badly, and you'll lose your license to do research. It's terrible. Don't do stuff like that. Don't call out Joe Schmo. You also have to ensure that they are receiving no harm, so you can't hurt Joe Schmo. You can't, for example, if you're testing Joe Schmo's IQ, if he gets below a certain IQ, you can't smack him in the head and tell him to do better. And then debriefing, you have to kind of explain. They have to be pretty aware of like what they're doing, what the purpose is, things like that. For animals, you just have to make sure that you are giving them a humane treatment. A lot of this, especially in like mice and stuff, like mice are a very highly researched group. I work with mice, and they have insane amount of regulations. You have to minimize their pain, minimize their stress, and you have to, your IRB, your institutional research board, you have to make sure you have a very justified scientific and research purpose for using animals. Yes, this is psychology. So moving on to number 6, what are psychological disorders and how are they determined? Essentially, what a psychological disorder is, it's, we kind of mentioned it in psychopathology. It is a dysfunction in like one of your any sort of your mental processes, like thoughts, feelings, emotions, behaviors, things like that. So dysfunction in mental processes. I actually have one here, but essentially you will use this textbook here. It's a manual of mental disorders. It's the DSM-5 TR. It's actually my girlfriend's. She uses that with her clients and stuff, So essentially that kind of moves us on to number 7, the DSM-5-TR. What is it? How's it organized? And what's included? So let's put this here, the DSM. Essentially it is a you classify mental disorders. This is essentially like kind of what justifies like treatment and stuff. It's organized by like categories. So like mood disorder, so like mood or anxiety. What's included? So you have like your primary disorders, your subtypes, different severities, and then medical conditions, psychosocial factors, coexisting conditions. Like if someone has a mood disorder and they also have diabetes or something. Then moving on. So this is we have theoretical perspectives in psychology for the last one, and I did make a table for that. So we can go through that table, wherever it is here. Alrighty. Can everyone see that table okay? You know if it's available online anywhere? I doubt it, honestly. It's a very expensive book. I believe that you have to... I know that she had to buy hers, and it was a lot of money. I think. Look up. Is the DSM free? Oh, I guess it is free online. Yeah. But it is a very expensive book. I know that. Essentially, here we have our theoretical perspectives in psychology. So we can go over those real quick, and then we can do our practice questions. Alrighty. What's the name of the book? The DSM? It's just called the DSM. Is that what you're talking about? The DSM 5-TR. Is that what you're talking about, or what we're doing here? But anyway, moving on. So... Thanks. Yeah, no problem. John Watson and B.F. Skinner they did do behavioral. So they focus on observable behavior and learning through reinforcement and punishment. For the cognitive perspectives, which essentially is looking at like thinking, like critical thinking, memory, problem solving, Piaget and Beck. Humanistic is more so looking at personal growth, free will, self-actualization. It's Rogers and Maslow. Psychodynamic is what's kind of going on, like, without you really like thinking about it, like you're just unconscious behaviors, which they really come from like early childhood experiences. So Freud, Jung, and Erikson. I can't stand Freud. Oh my god. I don't know why we still learn about him, honestly. That dude was weird. When you really get deep into psychology, he's a weird guy. Cross-cultural, looking at different cultural factors, how they influence behavior and mental processes in individuals. So that's Hofstede, Triandis. Cognitive behavioral essentially incorporates both cognitive and behavioral principles to essentially look at thoughts and behaviors. That's Bandura and Beck. Positive psychology focuses on your strengths, happiness, and well-being. That's Seligman. And then biological is looking at genetics. I hear a lot about Freud. Yeah, Freud is, don't get me wrong, like he did a lot of psychology, but I don't know. To me, it's just weird. It was just so weird. My live still good? For some reason, Can everyone still hear me okay? Old friend Freud. Yeah, no. Just making sure. Can everyone still hear me? Yes. Okay. I don't know what that was. Biological is looking at our roles of genetics and neurotransmitters and certain our anatomy, our physiology, brain structure on our behavior. That was Sperry and Gazniga. And then evolutionary, big Charles Darwin guy, explains behavior based on survival and reproduction advantages. Does anyone know what app this is? This is Good Notes. This is Good Notes. Alrighty, so that essentially went over our theoretical perspectives. Thank you. Yeah, no problem. And I do have a couple questions here that we can go through if everyone's ready to go through those. Yep, they're on my website. This is for the T7. I think I have a T's review tomorrow at T's/Hezi review 10 a.m. EST. I'm not sure if it's on the T's or not, to be honest. But yeah, this is on my website. So this whole like document that we have here, the practice test, the answers, the definitions, all the terms are on my website. But anyway, the number one asks the difference between a sample and a population. Difference between a sample and a population. But Kelly, there we go. It is B. Let me get a smaller subset of the group being studied. Thank you for sharing and liking the live, guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Yeah, no problem. Case study, survey, and naturalistic observation. So which of these is a research method that involves observing behavior in its natural environment without intervention? Thank you for sharing the live. I really appreciate you. Yes, the answer is C. And correlation types. Which of the following is an example of a negative correlation? Which of the following is an example of a negative correlation? It's an interesting one. It's important to be able to identify a correlation, especially if you move on. Just in psychology or just the scientific field in general, you definitely need to know your correlations. Being able to identify a data set and correlate information. The answer is B. The more someone exercises, the less they weigh. That can be a little confusing, I see. But think about it. The more exercise, less weight. And if we go back up to the little note we made earlier, wherever she is, again, we have that. Again, more hours worked, higher paycheck, higher. The more you sleep, the more energy you have, higher. More time spent studying, higher test scores. So these are all positive, and this is negative. Moving on to a question about independent and dependent variables. In a study examining the effects on sleep and memory retention, what is the dependent variable? What is the dependent variable? Dependent. Right. What depends on the other variable in this? So the answer is C. It is the memory test scores. So if we think about what it would be test score, memory. I'm sorry. Just put memory and sleep. So the more sleep you get, the better your memory should be, essentially. So the amount of sleep would dictate what your memory is going to look like. And then let's take a look at ethics. What ethical principle requires researchers to explain the purpose of a study to participants after the study ends? I think the stem of the plant. Yes, that is. It's dependent on the amount of sleep. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for joining. Thanks for following. Appreciate you. The answer is C, debriefing. Moving on to number 6 here. Which of the following is not one of the key criteria for diagnosing a mental disorder? We didn't really cover this in my examples, but I can kind of, if there's a... We didn't really go over specifically, but there should be a pretty hopefully obvious answer. Yes, it is D, personal preference. Obviously, personal preference doesn't have anything to do with a mental disorder. I prefer eating strawberries over oranges. That does not mean I have a mental disorder. But dysfunction, or, that would mean I would start shoving strawberries in my ear, I guess. Or deviance, distress, freaking out from, if you maybe eat an orange, I would freak out and throw things and smash things like that. So looking at some organization, the DSM-5 TR, what is included in a full diagnosis? So we kind of mentioned all the different sections and subsections. We're number 7 now. But I didn't really go into this in too much detail here, so I can definitely give. Thank you for the follow. Thanks for joining, everybody. We're going over, so if you're just joining us, welcome in. We're going over some psychology. So it is A. So you have to look at the primary disorder, its specific subtypes, and its severity level, and then for diagnosis. So example, you have a patient, and for them to be given a prescription medication, or for them to be basically covered by their insurance, you have to fill out all these different things. Thank you for joining, and thank you for sharing the live. So last couple questions here. Taking a look at our theoretical perspectives. Which psychological perspective focuses on how behavior is learned through reinforcement and punishment? Following you for studying. Awesome, thanks for following. I appreciate it. I go live pretty much every day, Sunday through Friday. So every day except for Saturday. Saturdays, I take my little breaks. Yes, number 8 is behavioral. So who is most associated with the psychodynamic perspective? Oh my goodness. So it's unconscious behavior, essentially. My op, I call him. Hate this guy. Yes, yeah, definitely my favorite psychologist. What a weirdo. I definitely think that Freud would, in 2025, I don't think his research would do very well. But man's just everywhere, my God. But yeah, it's Freud. my favorite. My girlfriend also hates Freud. She's in psychology too. So she's about to finish with her master's. So I would hope that me also having the same opinion about Freud as her would definitely help justify my hatred. Anyway, our last question here. Evolutionary psychology. Which of the following would best represent an evolutionary perspective in psychology? But while you guys answer here, let me just tell you why I hate Freud. Freud is just a freaking weirdo, man. He was obsessed. And they don't justify this, obviously, in textbooks because they don't want you to freak out. But he was obsessed with the Oedipus complex, which is essentially... If you ever watched Oedipus Rex... the guy, obviously, loses his way from his family, and then he falls in love with his mom. He was obsessed with it, where, everything was just about, sex for him. It's just so weird. It was just sex is, the main driving force of human behavior. He called this thing as, he described, young boys as... rivals for their dad and called it penis envy. So weird. I remember something about as soon as a girl turns 5, she starts hating her mom and starts wanting a baby. Interesting. I don't remember that part, but it's probably true. Yeah. I just can't really. He thought cocaine was a miracle drug. He did have unfortunately an important thing on it. Yeah, didn't know that. Yeah, he was obsessed with the Oedipus complex. I'm convinced this dude developed this because he was, in my opinion, wanted his mother, man. God. That's what I think. But yeah, it was he thinks that young boys, I don't know, makes me uncomfortable. Should make you, yeah. Yes, it was so weird. Yeah. Anyway, here, last question here. Let's be examining the influence of genetics and natural selection on behavior. Essentially, our survival instincts, stuff like that. That was all that I had planned for psychology. I'm going to take a little break, and then I'm going to do the endocrine system problems that I had planned for yesterday. That I didn't really get to. But Kelly, did you have any questions, or was this helpful? Yeah, the Electra complex. That's what it's called. That's right, yeah. I do remember that now. Yeah, just really weird. I think it's just so weird. I think we went super deep into studies in comparison. Oh my gosh, no. Freud wanted to go deep into his mother, I guess. That's what I think. Weirdo. Oh my goodness. But are there any questions on the chapter 1 here? We will continue on with our psychology stuff on Sunday. So, chapter 2 plus possibly chapter 3 on Sunday. 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Kelly, when is your can you remind me when the midterm is again? I apologize. I've just had so many requests for stuff. I had my midterm today. The TQRSP wave review you did yesterday helped me a lot. Awesome. I'm so glad, Bella. Congratulations. Hopefully your midterm went well. Wednesday the 5th. Okay. Is that Sunday? So we'll do psychology stuff Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday then. So we can review for your test. Get all the information done. I'm heading to have my midterms today. Awesome. Good luck on your midterms. Thank you. This was a good review, Ollie. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad. I hope this was helpful. Was this helpful, Kelly, or is there anything else that I particularly didn't really cover. I tried to make sure I got everything for chapter 1 here. But we'll make sure that everything gets done before your midterm Wednesday. For sure. But I will take a little break here, and then we'll do everything was covered. Awesome, perfect. Was this helpful? Or is there any way that I could make it a little more helpful? Just so I can. I have like chapter 2 and 3 prepared, but I can go back and make sure. But were we all good on the? Was this a helpful? Alrighty. For some reason, my lives always get restricted when I do practice questions, which is so weird. I don't know why. Okay, you now know the keywords. Perfect. It's definitely important, knowing the words and how to apply them and stuff. Alright, so I'm going to take a little break, and then I will be back to do endocrine system. But thanks for watching, everybody. I hope this was helpful. We'll see you again on Sunday, hopefully, Kelly, for the rest of your psychology stuff. See you guys in a little bit.